We will now continue our discussion of the use of general sub-procedures. In this movie, we will focus on the function procedures. Like general procedures, function procedures are used when two or more procedures perform the same operation. It allows you to write code which is reusable and can be called upon as needed. It is very useful to make large, complex code into much smaller and more manageable code. And in the long run, it aids in program maintenance, making future modifications much easier. You'll recall there are two types of procedures: a sub-procedure, which simply performs some action, and a function procedure, which performs an action, but also will return a value. When writing function procedures, you write a specific function that will calculate a value. You call that function from the location in the code where needed. The function procedure will return the value, but you must specify a data type for the value being returned. As a programmer, you may need to calculate a value that will be needed in several different procedures or programs. You can write your own function that will then calculate a value and call the function from the location as needed. In viewing the general form of a function procedure, you'll notice that this procedure looks just like a sub-procedure, except that the word function replaces the word sub on both the first and last line. The procedure header also includes a data type, which is the type of the value being returned by the function. Remember that functions also have arguments. You supply arguments to a function when you call the function by replacing a value or values inside of the parentheses. You can choose to pass the arguments by value or by reference. Passing arguments by value or by reference is discussed in a separate movie. As an example, I will create a function procedure called bonus pay that calculates and returns a salesperson's commissions, perhaps. As you'll note, the function header, private function bonus pay, open close parentheses, as decimal. The as decimal indicates the type of data that will be returned by the result of this function. That is, this is the data type of the returned value. In between the words private function bonus pay as decimal and the last line in function, you will place the code necessary to calculate the bonus pay. That would be ordinary calculations that you would use any type of calculations elsewhere in the program. Typing a block of code using the function in function statements creates a function procedure. Since the procedure returns a value, you must specify the data type, which in this case would be decimal. But keep in mind that data type could be any legitimate data type. You should also note that, similar to general procedures, functions can be declared as public or friend in addition to private. You'll note in the example that there is an argument being passed, in this case hours worked decimal. You supply arguments to a function when you call the function by placing a value inside the parentheses. As we said before, you can choose to pass the values by value or by reference. The default is by value, which in this case is what's being specified for the hours worked decimal. You'll also notice in this example that the returned value is a decimal, as well as the argument being passed is a decimal. This would not necessarily need to be true in all cases. In other words, you could pass a non-decimal value and then return it as a decimal, if that's what was desired. In the function procedure, the argument list you enter establishes the number of arguments, their data type, and their specific sequence. When using multiple arguments, the sequence of the arguments is critical. Just as when you use the predefined Visual Basic functions, the order of the arguments listed must agree with the receiving and sending statements respectively. The main difference between coding a function procedure and coding a sub-procedure is that a function procedure must set up the return value. The return value is placed in a variable that Visual Basic names is the same name as the function name. So in this case, the returning value would be placed in the function called bonus pay. You can then use bonus pay in a statement elsewhere in the program, which would in turn contain the result of the calculation in this function. And finally, when you're ready to call the function procedure, in a similar fashion to the general procedures, you simply type the procedure name at the point in the code that you wish the code to be executed. Make sure you include the parameter that is being passed. In our example, the function being called is bonus pay. The parameter being passed is hours worked decimal, which you see in parentheses. That's it. So at this point in the program, that statement is being executed. This assumes, of course, that bonus pay is a function that's been coded elsewhere in the program, and that hours worked decimal is the value that is being passed to the function to be calculated. Once this function has been executed, the control of the program returns to the next statement that would appear below this bonus pay call statement.